West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Democratic Congressman Hakeem Jeffries is beginning to speak out on how he'll be carrying the party's agenda moving forward now that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is stepping back from her leadership post. On CNN State of the Union, Jeffries addressed one challenge as the likely new minority leader, dealing with a Republican-controlled House.
There is going to be, because of the narrow majority that House Republicans are going to have, the far right wing, the MAGA caucus, is going to be empowered and emboldened. It's going to make it tougher for McCarthy to govern as Speaker if he does in fact become Speaker. If Kevin McCarthy needs votes to pass essential legislation, such as keeping the government open or raising the debt limit, will Democrats be willing to help him if the Freedom Caucus folks, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, refuse to participate?
Well, it seems to me that that's a case-by-case basis, but Democrats have always been willing to lean in on making sure that we fully fund the government, and Democrats have always been willing to lean in and making sure that we meet our nation's obligations and do not default on our debt for the first time in American history. I think it's also important to point out, Jake, that we have consistently fought against extremism on the Republican side, including when it manifested itself often during the former president's tenure, while at the same time being able to find common ground to make progress for the American people.
And joining me now is a man who has held many titles in his career, including Secretary of Defense, CIA Director, White House Chief of Staff. He also served 16 years in the House. Leon Panetta, thanks so much for being with us once again. Let me start with President Biden and what the Democrats are facing. GOP-controlled House where Kevin McCarthy, because of his slim majority, is facing pressure from far-right members who want to investigate everything from the Biden family business dealings to the Afghanistan withdrawal to the FBI search at Mar-a-Lago. If you're in Ron Klain's shoes over there at the White House, what are you thinking looking down Pennsylvania Avenue right now?
Well, the most important question to answer is whether or not the Republicans are interested in governing, or are they interested in raising hell? I think the message coming out of these midterms is that the American people are tired of extremism. They're tired of undermining our democracy. They really do want both parties to work together in order to govern. And so I think it's very important for the White House to try to reach out to the Republicans, obviously to the Democratic leadership, and see whether or not there's a willingness to work together on major issues facing the country. That'll be the test, not only for the Congress, but for the White House.
And if not, I mean, could this be a godsend to Joe Biden if he's thinking about running for re-election?
Well, I was chief of staff when the Congress went Republican after the first 2 years of the Clinton administration. And although the president obviously was despondent at the time, he also recognized that it might be an opportunity to be able to work together with Republicans and try to get some things done. And that's exactly what happened. And it led to the president's reelection. So I think that President Biden understands that message. I think, in his guts, he wants to be able to see if he can try to work with both sides to get things done. He knows that the purpose of being president, the purpose of being elected, is to try to solve the problems in the country. So I think President Biden is going to try to explore opportunities for trying to see if there can be compromise.
And in a single week, we learned that former President Donald Trump was running for president again, and that a special counsel had been appointed to investigate both his actions around the January 6th attack and his handling or mishandling of classified documents taken to Mar-a-Lago. Trump had this response. Let's listen.
This horrendous abuse of power is the latest in a long series of witch hunts. They want to do bad things to the greatest movement in the history of our country, but in particular, bad things to me.
I guess adding to that, his tweets leading up to January 6th are visible again because his Twitter account was restored by Elon Musk. What do you think? Are we seeing the potential for Trump to wreak more havoc over the next couple of years?
Well, I don't think there's any question. That's the way Trump operates, is through chaos and through havoc. And as you heard in his remarks, there's absolutely no kind of argument with regards to his innocence, or with regards to the charges that are being investigated. He's just basically accusing whoever is investigating him of being political. I think that the reality is that this president, President Trump, has to be held accountable for the things that he did. And he has spent a lifetime avoiding accountability. And he's going to try to do that again by trying to just raise chaos in the political world. I think that game has been overplayed by President Trump. And I think the American people recognize that. And I don't think it's going to play the same way it's played in the past.
Do you think the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, was being a tad too cautious in naming a special counsel?
Well, he was in a difficult position no matter what he did. If he went ahead with the prosecution on his own, I'm sure that President Trump would make the same accusations against the Attorney General. On the other hand, I do think that frankly, in order to be fair and objective in this investigation, a special counsel, I believe, is warranted. It's going to take some additional time. I recognize that. But I really do think that the better course here is to have a special counsel handle the prosecution on both Mar-a-Lago as well as January 6th.
I want to move to another story. The U.S. has determined that the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman should be granted immunity in a case brought against him by the fiancé of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist who the Biden administration has said was murdered at the prince's direction. The argument was that MBS is a sitting head of government, but the reaction has been fierce. Amnesty International saying the U.S. government should, quote, hang its head in shame. This is nothing more than a sickening, total deep betrayal. What's your take on this?
Well, I think what the administration did, what the White House did, was to basically follow precedent in this situation with regards to a world leader. Now, it doesn't mean that they have to give up in terms of putting pressure on the head of Saudi Arabia, particularly with regards to the Khashoggi matter. I do think that there are other ways to approach this in terms of making sure that the full story comes out as to what happened. I understand, though, the precedent issue. When you start deciding to prosecute the head of a nation, it can backfire on a lot of countries, including the United States. So I understand the reasoning for why they took the position they did. but it is not an excuse for letting up on the pressure that has to be brought on Prince Salman for what happened with Khashoggi.
It is Monday, the 21st of November of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays, and you know why. Because, well, after the weekend comes Monday, and because of a weekend, we take what is left over and reconstitute it into a lovely gourmet delight for your gourmet pleasure. How do you like that? Well, the World Cup has started, and I want to assure people, I know that we're supposed to be boycotting the World Cup. I'm not watching the World Cup. I'm just glancing at it a little. And because, well, you know, it is the World Cup. Anyway, it looks like all the things that we warned about when Qatar was chosen to be the host country are coming to fruition. It looks like teams that anybody wearing the One Love armband, you know, in solidarity with the LGBTQ community around the world, will be issued a yellow card. And that in soccer, if you don't know, or football, if you don't know, is a penalty. And if you get two of them, you get a red card and you're out of the game or the match. So quite a few teams have decided not to go that route, and I can understand. I mean, you're in Qatar, you never know what might happen. Okay. Yeah, it looks like it's a libertine island of freedom, but it's not. All right. They'll take the money, but they may just take you and spirit you away somewhere. You just never know. So there's that. And what else? Oh, well, I was wondering, though, Iran today played England, and the Iranian team did not partake in its country's national anthem. Now, it is the official national anthem, though people do call it a anthem of an occupying force, which is the Islamic Republic, and some might consider that to be a correct assessment, and I certainly consider it to be so. And good for them. Though knowing how things are working now in the World Cup in Qatar, will they be issued a yellow or a red card for doing something so heinous? Mm-hmm. All right. I wonder if like a guy and a gal kiss in Qatar, will they be thrown in jail, possibly beheaded? I'm telling you, it is not a free country there. It only looks like it because of all the largesse, the excess that has been wrought there. See what petrodollars do? Raised our gas prices, and then they build another 800-floor skyscraper to the sky. Maybe 800 floors is too little. Maybe it's even bigger than that now. Anyway, we warned people that this would happen. And I'll just give you a little bit of background. Host countries of the World Cup are supposed to have some sort of history with soccer or football. And Qatar really doesn't have much. You know, yeah, they fielded a team. I know. But they have no history in group play over the years. But they got a lot of money. Another aspect of choosing host countries is bringing smaller countries, and I know that there's a lot of money involved in getting stadiums in the area up to snuff for people to come and watch an event that goes over the course of about a month. And but to bring smaller countries into the world stage in the hopes of raising their lot in life. And I think Qatar has already raised their lot in life beyond all measure. But like I said, they got a lot of money. And you got the head of FIFA right now out there pretty much insulting us for caring about human rights concerns there, because we're hypocritical because of our the West has been colonialists. And so therefore we have no right to talk about anybody else putting their knee on the throats of their civilian population. All right. Well, you know what Bob Dylan said? Money doesn't talk, it swears. And the head of FIFA was just swearing at us. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, what else is going on in the world? Donald Trump is still not coming onto Twitter, and I'll tell you why. There is an SEC filing that stipulates that if he posts on Truth Social, he cannot post on another social media platform for 6 hours. So if he posts, then he has to wait 6 hours to post somewhere else. And then if he posts again on Truth Social, his little social media site, the clock starts again. So this is an SEC filing, and he could be penalized or even have the whole social media platform wrested away from his grubby little hands, and apparently he doesn't want that. So he's been playing a little bit of games with Ellen. And I got to tell you, this guy who owns Tesla and now Twitter and runs SpaceX, I guess he owns SpaceX too, but he runs all of these concerns, is one hell of a coarse, crass individual. I suppose one would expect that when your fortune was made by apartheid blood emeralds. Yeah, that's where he grew up in. Does he care about his workers? I don't think so. He had a what I considered to be a hostage photo with a bunch of engineers who he claimed have decided to continue on and take his ultimatum to work harder, longer hours, and basically kiss his ass at every step of the way. What was not stated by this crass, coarse individual, but was certainly recognized by the rest of us, is that the vast majority of those engineers sure look like they may be on HB1 visas. And if you're on an HB1 visa, you don't really want to offend the coarse, crass individual who now holds your life in his hands. Looked like a hostage photo to me. Sort of like when Saddam Hussein had that little kid that was all scared looking and stuff. It's like, yeah. See, Saddam's going, I love little kids. See, and the little kid's like, I'm going to be a human shield. I'm going to be dead. And he's just a little kid, and he already knows the danger. Yeah, these wan smiles. Except there was one guy in the front. In other employee photos, when it was with the more diverse, and I got to tell you, there's a lot of women that were working at Twitter before Ellen came back on, because I only saw maybe that I could recognize in somewhat of the blurry background of the what I call the hostage photo. I think there was 1 or 2 women there, maybe. But in others, women dominate, and people of color dominate. So, but this one fellow in the front that's in what I call the hostage photo didn't have the wan smile. He looked actually tickled pink, literally. But you look at his photo in the other employee group pics, and he doesn't look so happy. So he's happy now. I guess he doesn't have to worry about all those women telling him, oh, you can't be so mean. You have to think about other people's feelings and stop mansplaining everything. Yeah, he's happy now. Yep. Finally got some mansplainers running the show. I think everything's going to be fine. And look at it. It is teetering on a precipice. One thing breaks one little small part, and the whole thing is going to come crashing down. It is running on autopilot, and I know how things run on autopilot. If you're not around there to do some sort of manual manipulation, or, if I had to explain from afar how to simply just turn on my Mac and get it going again if we had a power outage here, yeah, I have a problem with the battery in the broadcasting MacBook. And so it is no longer a laptop. It's more like a desktop. So if the power goes out, then, it doesn't keep running. It starts over, which is not good because it's the broadcaster, and that means it needs to be reset and the program put in order, and the queue of our shows or the URLs where we pick up live feeds like now. So, or the PV channel when we have Hartman and when we have Randy Rhodes on. So if that's not there, actually, if the machine was able to reset back to the program, those presets for time would come up. But there would be a lot of dead time until they do, because I usually have actual shows on file that get put in that are formatted from our content folk, So it would be a little bit difficult to explain how to reset that. What if somebody who knew about some issue with a forgotten little button in a server farm somewhere in Iowa, and that person knew that, when A happens, I got to go over here and manually reset this little server out there in Iowa at that server farm, and before B happens. That person is no longer there. Would someone who is currently working be able to get a hold of that person and say, hey, what do I do? Would that person be so willing to say, okay, go ahead, I'll tell you how to do it, after they've been forced out of their livelihood? Well, all right. I've worked for some temperamental chefs before in my life. And when I became a chef, I started to take on the mantle of the temperamental chef. But I was taken aside, and I was told, or advised, shall we say, that in the situation in which I was working, which were on yachts, there was no place for my staff to go to vent after I went off on them. In a landlocked restaurant, there's always a broom closet somewhere that somebody can go in there and just scream the F word or bury their face in a bunch of towels so it muffles, the F-bombs. People need to vent when they're pushed to their limit. So, I don't know, maybe in my character development and how to be a boss, I might have thought, well, this is my right. I mean, I had to put up with it, so now other people are going to have to put up with it. Isn't that the way of things? But when it was explained to me that I might be making it not only bad for my employees, but the people out there partaking of our food can feel the stress, even though it may not be verbalized. They can tell. And you've been in places where that it's been very stressful, that the staff are in some sort of PTSD, except it's not post, it's like permanent, because it's happening right now as we speak, or as we eat our little hors d'oeuvres, sip our aperitif. So I had an epiphany. I realized that there's no room for a temperamental chef when you're trapped. When your staff is trapped with you, what are you going to do? Just cause them to go off? Yeah, you can't have that. So I realized that I was going down a dangerous path. I thought I was owed this behavior because I had to put up with it. And in this little talk, I realized, developing one's character, evolving, the survivors are those who can adapt and change. And I realized there is no room for temperamental chefs anywhere, actually. It's not fair to the people around you. And if you want to be selfish, it's not fair to you either. There are some people who don't have the type of empathy to even care about their staff until they start thinking about how it impacts them. But my situation, I realized that, as I stated, I was going down a wrong path and changes need to be made, and I needed to treat the people around me more kindly. I may be a perfectionist, but part of that perfectionism is probably one's doubting of one's own abilities. We all overcompensate. We become authoritarian dictators because we fear someone might see through us. There's a better way. I have also worked for very gentle souls, like Paul Hawken. My experience with Paul Hawken is that he didn't need to use fear and intimidation to motivate people. But kindness and reason was a great motivator. In fact, his great axiom was information is valuable. The more information you give someone, the more they might be willing to part their money. And it's true when you're working with and for someone. The more information you have, the better it is for you to do your job. There's no mystery involved. So, we have a bunch of coarse, crass, Lord of the Flies choir boy jacks running around now. Maybe we need to nationalize their excess. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what is the solution. Well, you can't tax them. You just have to let them do what they're going to do, I guess. Well, there are other countries around the world who are not taking kindly to his arbitrary firings because it is illegal to do what is happening here, happening over there. And maybe they have some teeth to grab onto whatever is near and dear to him so that he might wake up, because he's certainly not waking up now. Oh, well, let us look into what we have in store for you here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Bistro Cafe, to be specific, as we begin. Yes, at the top. That was former CIA Director Leon Panetta. He noticed something about Trump's response to the DOJ investigation now, didn't he? Uh-huh. On the rest of the menu, despite dangerous pregnancy complications threatening the life of the mother, abortions are still being denied. The FTX bankruptcy filing says it owes more than $3 billion, that's with a B, to its creditors. And the Club Q shooting follows a year of bomb threats, anti-drag protests, and virulent anti-trans bills stoking the flames. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Brazilian economist Ilan Goldfajn has been selected to lead the region's largest development bank after the previous president was fired for misconduct. And in a historic move, developed nations at the COP27 agreed to help developing countries pay for the catastrophic consequences of climate change. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link, across the page at our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. It helps us pay our bills, and we need the help because the bills keep a-coming. So I'll leave it for Tom Hartman, to tell you a little bit later on what to do. But yeah, please do become a recurring Patreon It really does help. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio, and we thank Tom for taking care of that. Follow me on Twitter while you still can. I'm not leaving, but while the platform is still there. And you can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos 10 minutes before showtime, and you can find that on my Twitter feed, or I don't know, where else, I might be someplace else. I'm on Facebook, too, for what it's worth. Why? I don't know. But anyway, the show notes and links is where the real reportage can be found. So do find it. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, you can do that by going to @CookbookWest on Twitter and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. All right. Time's a-flying, I know. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Laura Unger and Heather Hollingsworth. Weeks after Roe v. Wade was overturned, Dr. Grace Ferguson treated a woman whose water had broken halfway through pregnancy. The baby would never survive, and the patient's chance of developing a potentially life-threatening infection grew with every hour. By the time she made it to Pittsburgh to see Ferguson, the woman had spent 2 days in a West Virginia hospital, unable to have an abortion because of a state ban. The law makes an exception for medical emergencies, but the patient's life was not in danger at that moment. She was just kind of standing on the edge of a cliff, Ferguson said, waiting for an emergency to happen or for the baby to pass away. In Pennsylvania, at the hospital, a 4-hour drive away, Ferguson was able to induce labor to end the pregnancy. A growing number of physicians and families tell similar stories as a post-Roe fear comes to pass. Pregnant women with dangerous medical conditions are showing up in hospitals and doctors' offices only to be denied the abortions that could help treat them. Some doctors in states with restrictive abortion laws say they have referred or suggested more patients go elsewhere than ever. Some women are facing harmful, potentially deadly delays. Doctors say they're forced to balance medical judgment with potential punishments, including prison time. Although even the strictest laws allow abortion to save a mother's life, a weighty question lingers. How close to death must the patient be? You don't automatically go from living to dead, Ferguson said. You slowly get sicker and sicker. It is impossible to say when that line is crossed, said Dr. Allison Haddock, who's on the board of the American College of Emergency Physicians. There's just no moment where I'm standing in front of a critically ill patient where I know, okay, before their health was just in danger, but now their life is in danger, she said. Experts say it's hard to pinpoint data on abortion denials when serious complications arise. Employers often discourage health care workers from speaking about them, though the AP reached more than a dozen doctors and patients who shared stories of such denials. And many doctors and researchers agree that evidence, if largely anecdotal, shows a widespread problem. In Texas, for example, a doctors' association sent a letter to the state's medical board saying some hospitals refuse to treat patients with major complications because of the state's abortion ban. And at the University of California, San Francisco, researchers who invited healthcare workers nationwide to anonymously send examples of poor quality care caused by abortion restrictions say they were surprised by the initial volume of responses. 25 submissions came in the first 6 weeks. Among them were descriptions of patients sent home after their water broke in the second trimester, who later returned with serious infections. One told of an ectopic pregnancy that it was allowed to grow on a scar left by a previous cesarean section, which can cause uterine rupture, hemorrhage, and death. The legislators are playing with fire, said Dr. Dan Grossman, the project's leader. Dr. Kara Hooser, a maternal fetal specialist in Utah, recalled one patient denied an abortion in Idaho despite developing a serious heart condition midway through pregnancy. The woman had to be transported to Utah for the procedure. Dr. Lauren Miller, a maternal fetal specialist in Boise, said she regularly sees patients whose water breaks at 15 through 19 weeks gestation, and all doctors can do is help them make the tough decision. Do they stay here for their care and just wait until something bad happens? Or do we facilitate them finding care out of state? Dr. David Eisenberg, an associate professor at Washington University in St. Louis, said Missouri doctors and hospitals are regularly punting that responsibility for care. When people show up with serious complications, they wind up at the university-affiliated medical center where he works, one of the few in Missouri that performs abortions in such cases. He said patients in crisis are told, "I've got to call the lawyer for the hospital before I can figure out what to do." That is just totally insane and totally inappropriate and really unfortunate, he said. The stories are similar when pregnancy is complicated by cancer, diagnosed in about 1 in 1,000 pregnant women each year. Dr. Karen Knudsen, CEO of the American Cancer Society, said some oncologists are confused about treating pregnant cancer patients, particularly when therapies may induce miscarriage. Dr. Kristen Tochi, medical director for Planned Parenthood of Rocky Mountains, said she's seen patients with life-threatening diagnoses forced to drive 10 hours or more or fly out of state to get abortions so they can begin chemotherapy or radiation treatment. Tochi said she recently treated a Texas woman whose cancer had gone into remission but came back aggressively after she became pregnant with her second child. She sought an abortion to resume the cancer treatment that promised to keep her alive for her toddler, and during the visit she thanked Tochi repeatedly. "I finally told the patient, 'You can't thank us anymore, we're doing our jobs.' I said, 'I'm so disturbed that you had to travel so far with your family and the hurdles you have had to overcome.' Some abortion opponents say doctors may be unnecessarily denying abortions in life-threatening situations out of fear. Dr. Patty Gibeek, a former abortion doctor who described changing her views in her book Unexpected Choice, an abortion doctor's journey to pro-life, said it comes down to intent. If you intend to save the mother and not end the life of the fetus, she said, you're doing good medicine. We're sort of in a period of time where all these questions come up, she said. The legislators are going to be working to solve some of these problems. Well, if I might jump in, I think they've caused too many of the problems already, and we don't need some turncoat telling us what to do. Stephen Zaitchik of the Washington Post brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange that collapsed amid a liquidity crisis earlier this month, owes creditors at least $3 billion, it said in a new court filing, and 10 of its creditors are owed at least $100 million. The revelations came in a filing to U.S. bankruptcy court in Delaware late on Saturday, offering a striking portrait of the sheer number of entities that had considerably invested in, lent money to, or otherwise engaged with a 3-year-old company that had done little to demonstrate it could properly safeguard the assets entrusted to it. Its top 50 creditors are owed a total of $3.1 billion, the filing showed, with the largest due $226 million. The names of the creditors were redacted, but what is known is that over its short history, FTX had received capital from a slew of investment firms, including Sequoia Capital, BlackRock, and Tiger Global, as well as entities such as the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. It also entered a number of paid sports sponsorships with parties, including the National Basketball Association teams and Major League Baseball. And the crypto research firm Chainalysis has said it did business with FTX and is owed money. In a separate filing on Saturday, new FTX chief executive John J. Ray said the company will seek sales and other forms of capitalization to ensure that as many creditors as possible get their money. Pennies on the dollar, I would presume. He noted that some of the subsidiaries of FTX have solvent balance sheets, responsible management, and valuable franchises, which could facilitate that process. Some 130 FTX sister companies are also part of the bankruptcy filing. Casey Parks of the Washington Post brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. In the hours after the shooting, investigators did not say what led someone to open fire Saturday night in a Colorado gay bar, killing at least 5 people and injuring 25 others, but LGBTQ advocates across the country believe a surge of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and laws is at least partially to blame. When politicians and pundits keep perpetuating tropes, insults, and misinformation about the trans and LGBT plus community, this is a result. Colorado Representative Brianna Titone, a Democrat, had tweeted on Sunday. Titone, Colorado's first openly trans legislator and the chair of the state's LGBTQ Legislative Caucus, said anti-LGBTQ lawmakers, including one of her colleagues, have used hateful rhetoric to directly incite attacks against LGBTQ people. Though the most recent FBI data shows the number of hate crimes against LGBTQ people remained relatively flat between 2008 and 2020, an independent analysis by the research group Crowd Counting Consortium shows that right-wing demonstrators have increasingly mobilized over the past year against the community. Already this year, armed protesters and right-wing groups such as the Proud Boys have used intimidating tactics to disrupt drag-related events in Texas, Nevada, and Oregon, as well as other states. Children's hospitals across the U.S. are facing growing threats of violence, including bomb threats, driven by an online anti-LGBTQ campaign attacking the facilities for providing care to transgender kids and teens. And that online threat is run by libs of TikTok. I want to remind folks that they are a terrorist organization. Officially, they ought to be. And in October, a man attacked a transgender librarian in Idaho before yelling homophobic slurs and attempting to hit 2 women with his car. And Idaho is one of 18 states that does not have hate crime protections for LGBTQ people, though many local law enforcement agencies still track those crimes. Jay Brown, a senior vice president of programs, research, and training for the Human Rights Campaign, said Americans can't and should not separate those acts of violence from state-sanctioned efforts to limit LGBTQ rights. We've seen more than 340 anti-LGBTQ bills filed this year alone, Brown said. We've seen a huge increase in LGBTQ rhetoric online and by politicians, and we've seen real threats, and I would say those threats have become all too real because people have actually died. I will also note that in the county that Colorado Springs is in, the sheriff refuses to enforce the red flag laws, and this particular suspect, who for some reason the cops can't find out who he is or what his motivation was, is the grandson of a California state representative in California, or near San Diego, a maggot who has spoken highly and favorably of the January 6th insurrection, calling those people patriots. And this kid, I'm calling him a kid, I guess. Maybe I shouldn't. This man issued a bomb threat against his mother and had a standoff with SWAT last year. And the DA closed the files, did not press charges, sealed that file, refused to enforce the red flag law that was issued upon this fellow, and now he has killed 5 people and injured over 25. All right, let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will go through the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, The Culture is Hero. Warning, slight spoiler. Let's call the Marvel Studios crew behind 2018's Black Panther Team Wakanda. Their mega hit blew way past movie all the way to worldwide cultural moment, giving the team the Alpine challenge of following it. Please forgive the callousness of this assessment, but the regrettable 2020 death from colon cancer of Black Panther star Chadwick Boseman may have helped their task, for it gives the impossible sequel, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, an obvious strong focus. With the in-story death of T'Challa conceived simply, executed movingly, we, the audience, are prompted to do what the characters also must: celebrate the magic of the last film, mourn its loss, and doing thus, move forward, poised to let those who remain discover themselves and reveal their own merits. And Wakanda Forever has many merits, one of them being reimagining what has been Atlantis in the comics as Talocan, an underwater city populated with descendants of super-altered Mayans who escaped the conquistadors. It works better than it sounds, and is a bold and maybe brilliant move, as it introduces another anti-colonialist non-white super player, and that's Team Wakanda's real brilliance, making a culture, and now cultures, the true superheroes in their films. As cool as that is, with DC's Black Adam, we now have 2 movies that make feints at their villains being international political/commercial white power structures, while instead delivering in their final acts people of color fighting other people of color. And I know that when, like with Black Panther Wakanda Forever, you focus on non-white stories with non-white characters, and inescapably your adversaries are going to be non-white, it still feels like playing it safe. What a cruel reality we have if you can't make culturally transgressive blockbusters without those sweet, sweet white supremacist dollars. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, Show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1831. That was the day that silk workers went on strike in Lyon, France. It was one of several strikes known as the Canut Revolts. Canut was a term used to describe Lyonnese silk workers. During this time, the textile industry was the main source of jobs in Lyon. Half of the working population of Lyon made their living at silk weaving. Silk was decentralized during this pre-industrial era. 1,000 plus bankers and traders controlled and financed the manufacturing and sale of silk goods. These manufacturers contracted 8,000 chief weaving craftsmen known as the Canuts. The craftsmen were paid for a specific order or by the piece. Canuts owned their own looms. These craftsmen in turn employed 30,000 apprentices. These workers were paid by the day and usually lived with their craftsmen employers. Women were also employed, but at a lesser salary. In 1831, a downturn in the economy caused a drop in silk prices and a lowering of workers' wages. As a result, workers tried to get a minimum price imposed on silk. When their demands were refused, the workers seized a local arsenal. The insurgents took over Lyon after a bloody battle with the local military. There were 600 casualties and 100 deaths. The French government sent in a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars with an army of 20,000 to restore order. Faced with this force, the workers gave in without any more bloodshed. Some workers were arrested, but eventually acquitted. The minimum price for silk was abolished, and the revolt unsuccessful. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 29 degrees Fahrenheit, continuing this air stagnation advisory. And with people burning their wood fireplaces to keep warm, you would expect it. It looks like we will be partly cloudy, though we are under sunny conditions at the moment, with highs in the mid-50s, winds light and variable, mainly clear overnight with lows in the low 30s, winds light and variable, and then cloudy skies tomorrow, with a slight chance of a rain shower, highs in the mid-50s, winds light and variable. Pollen is rated as none here in the town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is in the good range at 32 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is in the low range at level 1, so it's come down. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.3 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles, and relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 48 degrees Fahrenheit with rain. Paris is 46 with rain showers. Rome is 60 degrees and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 32 with rain and freezing rain. Kabul is 38 and clear. Hong Kong is 75 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 54 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 51 and clear. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York, New York is 36 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Latin American governments yesterday, Sunday, selected Brazilian economist Ilan Goldfajn to lead the region's largest development bank in the wake of a misconduct probe that led to the firing of the previous president. Governors for the Inter-American Development Bank's 48 members selected Goldfajn to lead the Washington-based multilateral lender from a slate of 5 candidates nominated by Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Trinidad and Tobago. It follows the firing in September of Mauricio Claver Carón, who had been the first American to lead the bank in its 63-year history. He was removed after an ethics probe found he likely carried on an intimate relationship with a subordinate, and he denied the allegation. The Inter-American Development Bank is the biggest multilateral lender to Latin America, dispersing last year a record $23 billion to alleviate poverty made worse by the coronavirus pandemic in the region. The U.S. is the largest shareholder with 30% of voting rights. The new president will be tasked with bolstering economies that were hit by the coronavirus pandemic and are now suffering from weakening currencies, increasing foreign debt and capital flight spurred by inflation, and rising interest rates in the U.S. and Europe. Last month, the IMF slashed its forecast for growth across the region to 1.7% in 2023, down from an estimate of 2% made in July. Goldfajn previously was president of Brazil's central bank and chief economist at several major Brazilian financial institutions. He took a leave of absence from his current job as the Western Hemisphere director at the IMF to compete for the position. He was nominated by Brazil's outgoing president, Bolsonaro.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Sarah Kaplan, Evan Halper, Timothy Pucco, Brady Dennis, and Michael Birnbaum bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and they all write for the Washington Post. Developed nations agreed yesterday, Sunday, to help developing countries pay for the catastrophic consequences of climate change, a historic agreement reached after weeks of fraught negotiations that went into overtime at this year's UN Climate Conference in Egypt. The conference conference hall of weary diplomats broke out in muted applause after COP27 President Sameh Sukri sealed the deal with a strike of his gavel. Still, the crucial questions of which countries must provide financing for the fund and which will be eligible to benefit from it have been left to future negotiations. As daybreak approached, nations adopted an overarching cover decision that does little to push the world toward more ambitious climate change. Despite growing calls for the text to include language on the need to phase out all polluting fossil fuels, it only reiterates language from last year's pact calling for a phase down of unabated coal. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.